Good evening, background historian crew. Tonight, we will explore a more secluded part of the world, yet one that's surrounded by world superpowers. North Korea, or the Hermit Kingdom, is a fascinating country that is a strong dictatorship that doesn't allow anyone in or out, and is under fire for various human rights violations. Let's dive into its history and culture. Please sit back and relax and prepare to drift off to sleep while we explore the Hermit Kingdom. Part 1: Foundations of the Hermit Kingdom, Ancient Korean Roots. Introduction. Before there was North Korea. When we speak of North Korea today, we imagine a secretive modern state sealed off from the world. But to truly understand it, we must go far back, thousands of years before barbed wire, portraits of the Kim dynasty, or nuclear brinkmanship. The land that is now North Korea carries layers of ancient culture, dynasties, myths, and struggles that shaped the Korean identity long before division. This first chapter explores the ancient and medieval roots of Korea, the soil upon which the North Korean state would one day be built. It is a journey through mythology, kingdoms, Confucian learning, invasions, and resilience, all of which echo faintly, even today, in the North Korean story. The myth of Tangan, birth of a nation. Every Korean child learns the story of Tangan, the legendary founder of Korea. According to myth, a heavenly prince descended to earth, fathering Tangan with a bear-turned woman. Tangan established the first Korean kingdom, Gojoseon, in 2333 BCE. This myth blends shamanism, animism, and a sense of destiny, suggesting that Korea was meant to be sacred and eternal. Even in modern North Korea, Tangan is celebrated. His supposed tomb, reconstructed in the 1990s near Pyongyang, is part of state propaganda that claims the North is the true heart of Korea. Gojoseon and the Ancient Kingdoms. The first historical Korean kingdom, Gojoseon, flourished in the northern region of the peninsula and Manchuria. It developed bronze culture, early agriculture, and trade with China. Legal codes emphasized morality and social order, setting patterns that persisted for centuries. By the 4th century BCE, Gojoseon was strong enough to confront Chinese states. Its eventual fall to the Han dynasty in 108 BCE marked the beginning of centuries of Chinese influence in northern Korea, a theme that would echo throughout history. The Three Kingdoms era, 57 BCE, 668 CE. From the ashes rose the Three Kingdoms. Goguryeo, based in the northern mountains, including today's North Korea. Known for powerful cavalry, fierce warriors, and cultural richness. Juche, centered in the southwest, a maritime kingdom with strong ties to Japan. Silla, located in the southeast, eventually unifying the peninsula with Chinese support. Of these, Goguryeo is most tied to the land now called North Korea. Its fortresses, tombs, and murals near Pyongyang reveal a culture of military pride and artistry. Goguryeo warriors resisted multiple Chinese invasions, earning legendary status. North Korea today often invokes Goguryeo as a symbol of national strength, linking modern Pyongyang to an ancient warrior kingdom. Unified Silla and Balhae, 668 to 935 CE. When Silla unified Korea, the northern lands remained contested. Unified Silla brought Buddhism, Confucian learning, and advanced art. Temples and pagodas dotted the peninsula. Balhae, founded in the north after Goguryeo's fall, kept northern traditions alive. It ruled over parts of Manchuria and North Korea, maintaining a unique identity. This dual heritage, the southern sophistication of Silla and the northern ruggedness of Balhae, created the cultural contrasts that echo even today. The Goryeo dynasty, 918 to 1392. The Kingdom of Goryeo, from which Korea derives its name, unified much of the peninsula again. Its capital was Kaesong, in modern North Korea. Goryeo became famous for Celadon pottery, Buddhist temples, and the Tripitaka Koreana, a vast collection of Buddhist texts carved into wooden blocks. Yet it was also an era of strife. Mongol invasions devastated the land, leaving scars of foreign domination. For North Korea today, Goryeo represents another cultural anchor, proof that the northern regions were central to Korean civilization. The Joseon dynasty, 1392 to 1897. With the rise of Joseon, the peninsula entered a long era of Confucian order. Confucian bureaucracy, exams and scholarship defined social life. Seoul as capital, the south became politically dominant, but northern provinces contributed soldiers, scholars, and workers. Defenses against invasions, northern Korea became a strategic borderland against China and later Manchu incursions. Though centered in Seoul, Joseon's reach extended across the peninsula, binding together the regions that would later fracture. Northern identity in history. Throughout these centuries, the northern lands, mountainous, harsher, closer to China, developed a unique character. Known for toughness, frontier spirit, and resilience. More militarized, given constant exposure to invasions. Less wealthy than southern regions but rich in folklore, shamanistic practices, and oral traditions. This regional identity would shape how modern North Korea later defined itself, as the true air of resilience and defiance. The arrival of Western influence. By the late 19th century, Korea, like much of Asia, faced Western encroachment. Catholicism, Protestant missions, and modern schools entered. Gunboats and treaties opened ports under unequal conditions. Nationalist stirrings grew, as Koreans debated how to resist foreign domination. Northern Korea, with its mountains and relative isolation, remained more resistant to outside influence. It would soon become the stronghold of anti-Japanese guerrillas. Closing reflection. Before it was North Korea, this land was Goguryeo fortress, Balhae's heartland, Goryeo's capital, and Joseon's frontier. Its myths, dynasties, invasions, and resilience forged a character that North Korea's rulers later claimed as their inheritance. As you drift to rest, imagine the misty mountains near Pyongyang, where murals of Goguryeo warriors still endure, or the silent tombs of Goryeo kings in Kaesong. This is the deep foundation, the ancient soil of the Hermit Kingdom. Part 2, Colonial Shadows, Korea under Japanese Rule, 1910 to 1945. Introduction, A Dark New Era. The early 20th century marked one of the most painful chapters in Korean history. After centuries of independence, Korea fell under Japanese occupation in 1910, beginning a 35-year period of colonial rule, repression, and resistance. For the land that would one day become North Korea, these years left scars still visible today. Scars of exploitation, cultural suppression, and memories of resistance that the modern state continues to invoke. Annexation of Korea. Japan's victory in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, solidified its influence over Korea. In 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, turning it into a colony. The Korean monarchy was abolished, Emperor Sunjong became a powerless figure. Japanese officials took control of administration, policing, and resources. This was not a quiet takeover, it was a deliberate effort to transform Korea into part of the Japanese Empire. Daily life under colonial rule. Life changed dramatically for Koreans. Land seizures, vast estates transferred to Japanese landlords, forcing Korean farmers into tenancy. Industrial exploitation, mines, factories, and railways developed, but profits flowed to Japan. Language suppression, Korean was banned in schools and public life, Japanese became the official tongue. Cultural repression. Names, traditions, and religious practices discouraged or outright banned. For many, survival meant navigating a world where their identity was under siege. Resistance movements. Despite repression, Koreans resisted fiercely. March 1st Movement, 1919, a nationwide uprising, where protesters filled streets demanding independence. Brutally suppressed, thousands killed, arrested, or beaten. Guerrilla fighters, in the northern mountains, fighters waged armed struggle against Japanese troops. Exiled leaders, activists in Shanghai and elsewhere established provisional governments, lobbying for recognition. Among these resistance fighters was Kim Il-sung, whose role in anti-Japanese guerrilla warfare later became central to North Korea's mythology. Economic transformation. Japan invested heavily in Korean infrastructure, but for its own benefit. Railways and ports, built to extract resources like rice, coal, and iron. Industrial growth. Pyongyang and northern regions saw factories rise, producing for Japan's war machine. Agricultural strain, Korean farmers forced to grow rice for export, leading to food shortages at home. Northern Korea, rich in minerals, became especially important for Japanese industry, a legacy that shaped its later industrial role after division. Cultural resistance. Even as Japan sought to erase Korean culture, Koreans found ways to resist. Secret schools taught Korean language and history in private homes. Literature and poetry, writers like Lee Kwang-soo blended modern styles with nationalist messages. Music and arts, traditional songs preserved identity beneath the surface. This cultural survival became a quiet act of defiance, ensuring Korea's spirit endured. The militarization of Korea. As Japan expanded into Manchuria and China, Korea became a staging ground. Conscription, Koreans forced into the Japanese military, fighting in wars they did not choose. Labor draft. Millions sent to Japanese factories, mines, and construction sites. Comfort women, Korean women coerced into sexual slavery for Japanese soldiers, a wound still raw today. Punishment for disobedience was swift and severe, with imprisonment, torture, or execution. The seeds of division. Colonial rule deepened divides that would shape post-war Korea. Collaborators, some Koreans worked with Japanese authorities, gaining wealth and power. Resistors, others fought in guerrilla bands or joined communist underground cells. Geographic splits, the North, heavily industrialized by Japan, contrasted with the agricultural South. When liberation came in 1945, these fractures ensured unity would not last. Closing reflection. The Japanese occupation was more than a chapter of exploitation, it was a crucible that forged the modern Korean identity. North Korea, in particular, built its later political legitimacy around the story of resistance to Japan. The cult of Kim Il-sung, the ideology of Juche, and the enduring hostility toward outsiders all trace their roots back to this era of colonial shadows. As you drift to rest, picture the crowded markets of Pyongyang under Japanese banners, the whisper of Korean taught in secret, and the echoes of the March 1st protests. This was a time of oppression, but also of resilience, the soil from which the modern North Korean state would rise. Part 3, Division of a Nation, the Birth of North and South Korea. Introduction, Liberation and Uncertainty. In August 1945, as World War II ended, Korea experienced what should have been its moment of freedom. After 35 years of Japanese colonial rule, Koreans dreamed of reclaiming independence and unity. Yet, in the confusion of global politics and the rivalry between superpowers, liberation did not bring harmony. Instead, it marked the division of the peninsula into North and South, a split that would define the destiny of modern Korea. Liberation from Japan. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered, ending the Second World War. For Koreans, this meant the collapse of colonial authority. Spontaneous celebrations, crowds filled the streets of Seoul and Pyongyang, tearing down Japanese flags. Power vacuum, with no government ready to take control, local people's committees sprang up, eager to establish self-rule. Dreams of unity, many Koreans hoped for a single independent nation at last. But the realities of geopolitics quickly shattered those dreams. The 38th parallel. In the chaos of Japan's surrender, the Allies hastily agreed to divide Korea for the purpose of disarming Japanese troops. US and Soviet agreement, the Soviet Union would accept surrender north of the 38th parallel, the US south of it. Temporary measure, intended as a short-term arrangement, not a permanent border. Unexpected consequence, the line became the seed of a divided nation. The 38th parallel was chosen in Washington almost arbitrarily, yet it cut through rivers, railways, and cultural regions, leaving families and communities torn apart. Soviet influence in the north. The Soviet Union quickly moved into northern Korea. Support for communists, they encouraged leftist leaders, particularly those with guerrilla backgrounds, to take control. Kim Il-sung's emergence, a relatively unknown guerrilla fighter, Kim was promoted by Soviet authorities as a loyal leader. Land reforms, large estates broken up, redistributed to peasants, a popular move that gained support among farmers. The Soviets portrayed themselves as liberators, but they also carefully shaped the foundations of what would become a communist state. American influence in the South. In the South, U.S. forces arrived in September 1945. Military government, the U.S. established direct administration, skeptical of local people's committees. Support for anti-communists. Conservative figures, often those with ties to the old colonial system, were placed in positions of power. Tensions with locals, many Koreans viewed this as another foreign occupation rather than liberation. The Americans saw Korea through the lens of Cold War containment, seeking to prevent communist expansion. The rise of two governments. Between 1945 and 1948, efforts to unify Korea faltered. Failed negotiations, joint commissions of the US and USSR collapsed over disagreements on elections. 1948 elections, separate elections held in the South, leading to the establishment of the Republic of Korea, ROK, under Syngman Rhee. Northern response, in September 1948, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, was proclaimed in Pyongyang under Kim Il-sung. From that moment, two rival states claimed legitimacy over the whole peninsula. Everyday life during division. For ordinary Koreans, the late 1940s were a time of dislocation. Families split across the 38th parallel, often unable to reunite. Farmers struggled as new governments imposed reforms and demanded loyalty. Political polarization deepened, with neighbors accusing each other of being communists or collaborators. The peninsula had been divided by foreign powers, but the division soon became a lived reality in daily life. The role of ideology. The North embraced communism and socialism under Soviet guidance. The South leaned toward capitalism and Western democracy under American influence. North emphasized collective agriculture, state control of industry, and revolutionary zeal. South focused on private property, foreign investment, and anti-communist policies. The ideological divide hardened into mutual suspicion, each side claiming to be the true Korea. Tensions and violence before war. Between 1945 and 1950, violence simmered across the peninsula. Guerrilla uprisings. In the South, communist sympathizers waged insurgencies. Suppression. The Southern government cracked down, sometimes massacring entire villages. Border clashes, skirmishes occurred along the 38th parallel, foreshadowing the full-scale war to come. The fragile peace was collapsing, and both governments prepared for open conflict. Closing reflection. The years 1945 to 1948 were a tragedy of missed opportunities. Korea had emerged from colonial rule, hopeful for unity and independence, but was instead caught in the gears of global rivalry. The 38th parallel, drawn hastily on a map, became the boundary of two worlds. For North Korea, these years cemented Kim Il-sung's rise and the Soviet-backed foundations of a communist state. For families, they were years of confusion, separation, and longing for reunification. As you rest, imagine the divided villages along the 38th parallel, where one half looked north to Pyongyang and the other south to Seoul. What was meant as temporary became permanent, shaping the destiny of millions. Part 4, The Korean War, 1950 to 1953 Fire and Division. Introduction, The War That Never Ended. For 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, the Korean peninsula became a battlefield of unimaginable destruction. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War in the West, but in North Korea it is the central event that defines the nation's identity. Every speech, monument, and museum in Pyongyang traces back to those years of fire. To understand North Korea today, we must enter the storm of war that forged its worldview. Prelude: tensions boil over. By 1949, both the North and the South claimed to be the sole legitimate Korea. Border skirmishes, armed clashes erupted along the 38th parallel. Ideological divide: Kim Il-sung sought unification under communism, Syngman Rhee aimed for unification under anti-communism. Soviet and American influence: the North armed by Moscow, the South supported by Washington. In June 1950, tension exploded into full-scale war. The invasion of the South. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces stormed across the 38th parallel. Surprise attack: the South Korean army, poorly prepared, collapsed quickly. Seoul falls: within days, the South's capital was captured. Northern advantage: Soviet tanks and artillery gave the North overwhelming firepower. For a brief moment, it seemed North Korea would unite the entire peninsula. U.S. and UN intervention. The United States, alarmed by communist expansion, rallied the United Nations. UN command, led by General Douglas MacArthur, forces from the U.S., Britain, Turkey, Australia, and others arrived. Pusan perimeter: South Korean and UN troops held a desperate defensive line in the southeast. Incheon landing: September 1950, MacArthur launched a daring amphibious assault, recapturing Seoul and cutting off northern forces. The tide turned dramatically, pushing North Korean troops back to the Chinese border. China enters the war. As UN forces approached the Yalu River, China intervened. Massive counterattack. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese volunteers poured into Korea. Seoul recaptured again, the South's capital changed hands multiple times. War of attrition: by 1951, the front stabilized near the original 38th parallel. The war had become a grinding stalemate. Life for civilians. For ordinary Koreans, the war was catastrophic. Bombing campaigns: U.S. air raids leveled northern cities, including Pyongyang. Bridges, dams, and even villages were targeted. Refugee crisis: millions fled homes, wandering across rivers and mountains. Famine and cold: harsh winters and disrupted agriculture brought starvation. Families torn apart: some remained in the north, others in the south, never to reunite. The civilian cost was staggering: by war's end, millions were dead or displaced. The Armistice of 1953. After years of bloody stalemate, both sides sought peace. Ceasefire signed at Panmunjom, July 27, 1953. The war ended in armistice, not peace. Demilitarized zone, DMZ. Established as a buffer, heavily fortified on both sides. No treaty: to this day, North and South Korea remain technically at war. For North Korea, the war never truly ended, it became the foundation of its defensive posture. Legacy of the war in North Korea. The Korean War shaped North Korea's identity in lasting ways. Cult of Kim Il-sung, elevated as the heroic liberator who defeated imperialist enemies. Anti-Americanism, cemented as the cornerstone of state ideology, reinforced by memories of bombings. Militarization, the entire society built around readiness for another war. Isolation, reinforced belief in self-reliance, Juche, as survival against hostile powers. Every North Korean schoolchild learns about the Fatherland Liberation War as a sacred narrative of sacrifice and defiance. Global impact of the Korean War. The war also shaped the world. U.S. military presence, cemented in South Korea, lasting to this day. China's rise. Proved itself as a major power willing to confront the U.S. Cold War escalation: Korea became one of the first hot wars of the Cold War. The peninsula's division became a global flashpoint, one that remains volatile even now. Closing reflection. The Korean War was not just a conflict between North and South, it was a crucible of ideologies, nations, and human suffering. For North Korea, it was the formative trauma that justified its paranoia, militarization, and devotion to leadership. As you drift to rest, imagine the frozen hills of the Korean winter, the roar of artillery echoing through valleys, and the faces of families divided by a line that was meant to be temporary but became eternal. The war is not just history for North Korea, it is the heartbeat of its national story. Part 5, The Rise of Kim Il-sung, Father of the Nation. Introduction. After the fire. When the guns of the Korean War fell silent in 1953, the land lay in ruins. Cities had been flattened, bridges and factories destroyed, and millions of lives shattered. Yet from this devastation rose a leader who would reshape Korea's northern half into one of the most tightly controlled societies on earth, Kim Il-sung. For North Koreans, Kim was more than a leader, he became the embodiment of their survival, the father of their nation, and the foundation of a political dynasty that endures to this day. To understand North Korea, one must understand how Kim Il-sung consolidated power, built a cult of personality, and established the guiding ideology of Juche. Kim Il-sung's early life and guerrilla years. Kim Il-sung was born in 1912 near Pyongyang, during Japanese colonial rule. Youth in exile, his family fled to Manchuria, where he grew up amidst nationalist ferment. Guerrilla fighter, in the 1930s, Kim fought in anti-Japanese resistance groups, gaining experience in partisan warfare. Soviet ties. He joined Soviet-supported units, eventually rising as a trusted commander. These guerrilla years became the bedrock of his later myth, celebrated endlessly in North Korean propaganda. Soviet backing and power in the North. After 1945, the Soviet Union sought loyal Korean leaders to govern the North. Kim's promotion, though relatively unknown, Kim was elevated by Soviet authorities. Political rivals, competing communists, nationalists, Chinese-trained partisans, Moscow loyalists, were gradually sidelined. Consolidation. By the late 1940s, Kim had emerged as the dominant figure, chosen to lead the newly declared Democratic People's Republic of Korea, 1948. Soviet support gave him legitimacy, but his skill in eliminating rivals gave him power. Cult of personality begins. From the start, Kim cultivated an image larger than life. Titles and imagery, called the Great Leader, his portraits filled homes, schools, and public spaces. Revolutionary myth-making. His guerrilla exploits against Japan were magnified into legend. Songs and literature, stories of Kim's wisdom and bravery spread through propaganda. This was not just leadership, it was worship. Kim was portrayed as both father and savior of the nation. Post-war reconstruction. The Korean War left North Korea in ashes, but reconstruction became a triumph of propaganda. Industrial drive, with Soviet and Chinese aid, factories and power plants were rebuilt rapidly. Land reforms, estates redistributed, cementing peasant loyalty. National pride, Pyongyang rebuilt with wide boulevards and monuments, symbolizing rebirth. Kim presented himself as the architect of recovery, crediting the resilience of the people guided by his leadership. Suppression of rivals. Kim ensured no alternative power bases survived. Factional purges, Soviet Koreans, Chinese-aligned communists, and nationalist rivals were purged through trials, imprisonment, or execution. Centralization. Power concentrated in the Korean Workers' Party under his personal control. Military loyalty, the army was purged of dissenters, ensuring allegiance to Kim alone. By the 1960s, Kim Il-sung stood unchallenged. The birth of Juche. In the 1950s and 1960s, Kim articulated Juche, the ideology of self-reliance. Philosophy, emphasized independence in politics, economy, and defense. Nationalism, Korea portrayed as uniquely resilient, refusing to depend on foreign powers. Practical use, Juche justified isolation from both Soviet and Chinese influence. Juche became not only political doctrine but a quasi-religious creed, ingrained in education and culture. Everyday life under Kim Il-sung. By the 1960s and 1970s, North Korean life revolved around the great leader. Portraits in every home, citizens bowed before Kim's image daily. School curriculum, children taught stories of his childhood bravery. Mass games, thousands performed synchronized displays glorifying Kim and the revolution. Surveillance, neighborhood watch units monitored loyalty and speech. Life was disciplined, structured, and always under the gaze of the leader. North Korea's international stature. Under Kim Il-sung, North Korea became a surprising force globally. Non-aligned movement, courted developing nations in Africa and Asia with aid and ideology. Cold War balancing act, played China and the Soviet Union against each other, maintaining autonomy. Global image, for a time, North Korea seemed more prosperous than the South, with its rapid post-war growth. Kim presented himself as not just Korea's leader, but a figure of global anti-imperialist struggle. The legacy cemented. By the 1970s and 1980s, Kim Il-sung was not just a leader, he was a living myth. Constitutional immortality, declared, eternal president, even after death. Monuments and statues, towering images erected across the nation. Dynastic transition, his son, Kim Jong-il, groomed to succeed him, ensuring continuity. Kim Il-sung's rule left behind more than policies, it created an entire system of worship and control that defines North Korea to this day. Closing reflection. The rise of Kim Il-sung transformed North Korea from a war-ravaged land into a fortress state defined by one man's image. His cult of personality, ideology of Juche, and authoritarian structures remain the foundation of the country. As you rest, imagine the boulevards of Pyongyang rebuilt after war, lined with statues of the great leader. Picture children reciting poems to him, workers singing hymns in factories, and the ever-present gaze of portraits on every wall. The man who rose from guerrilla fighter to eternal president still defines life in the Hermit Kingdom. Part 6, Juche, the philosophy of self-reliance. Introduction, the idea that defines a nation. If Kim Il-sung is the father of North Korea, Juche is the soul of the country. More than a political ideology, Juche has become a worldview, a moral code, and even a spiritual framework for the North Korean people. It is invoked in schools, written into constitutions, carved into monuments, and used to justify every action of the state. But what exactly is Juche? To outsiders, it often seems vague, a slogan of self-reliance. Yet within North Korea, it has evolved into a comprehensive way of life. This chapter explores the origins, philosophy, and practical applications of Juche, and how it continues to shape the nation's identity. Origins of Juche. Juche was introduced by Kim Il-sung in the mid-1950s. Early post-war years, North Korea, heavily dependent on Soviet and Chinese aid, needed an ideology that justified independence. First mention, 1955 in a speech, Kim stressed the need for Korea to follow its own path, free from foreign domination. Reaction to rivalries, the Soviet Union and China both sought influence over Pyongyang. Juche asserted North Korea's autonomy. Thus, Juche began as a political maneuver but grew into a defining philosophy. Core principles of Juche. At its heart, Juche rests on three interwoven principles. Chaju, political independence. North Korea must make decisions without reliance on foreign powers. Charip, economic self-sufficiency. The economy should be self-reliant, minimizing imports or foreign dependency. Choi, self-defense. In military, the nation must defend itself, building strong armed forces without reliance on allies. These principles reflect Korea's long history of invasions and domination by outsiders. Juche promised to ensure never again. Juche and the cult of leadership. Juche is inseparable from the Kim dynasty. Human-centered philosophy, Juche emphasizes that humans are the masters of the revolution. But with a twist, In practice, this meant the Korean people could only fulfill this role through the guidance of the great leader. Leader as brain. The masses were the body, the leader the head. Without him, they could not act correctly. Thus, Juche was never about true independence of the individual. It was about unity under the leader's guidance. Everyday applications of Juche. Juche permeates every layer of North Korean society. Education. Children study Juche philosophy as part of their curriculum from an early age. Agriculture. Farmers are urged to grow food through independent spirit, even when conditions are harsh. Industry. Factories emphasize producing goods domestically, often without adequate materials. Culture. Art and literature celebrate themes of self-reliance and loyalty to the leader. Even ordinary hardships, shortages, isolation, sacrifices, are reframed as noble expressions of Juche. Juche and isolation. One of the most visible outcomes of Juche is North Korea's isolation. Limited trade. The country avoids over-reliance on any partner, even China. Closed borders. Travel is tightly restricted, both for citizens and outsiders. Information control. Foreign media banned, ensuring cultural independence. Isolation, while costly, is portrayed as purity, the nation keeping its spirit intact. Juche architecture and symbols. North Korea's cityscapes reflect Juche ideology. Juche Tower in Pyongyang, a monumental spire representing self-reliance, illuminated with flame at its top. Propaganda posters, farmers, soldiers, and workers depicted with slogans praising Juche. Mass games. Thousands of performers create living mosaics celebrating independence and loyalty. Every symbol reinforces the message: North Korea stands alone, proud, and unyielding. Contradictions of Juche. Despite its emphasis on self-reliance, Juche often masked dependency. Soviet aid. North Korea relied heavily on the USSR for industrial development. Chinese support. During the Korean War and afterward, Chinese aid was critical. Modern reality. North Korea imports fuel, food, and goods despite proclaiming independence. Yet contradictions never diminish Juche's power as an ideology. It thrives as myth rather than reality. Juche in the 21st century. Today, Juche remains the official ideology of North Korea, though it has adapted. Songun, military-first policy under Kim Jong-il, Juche evolved to emphasize military strength. Pyongyang line, parallel development under Kim Jong-un, it expanded to include both nuclear weapons and economic growth. Global message. Even in diplomacy, North Korea frames every negotiation in terms of protecting its independence. Juche remains the language of legitimacy for the regime. Closing reflection. Juche is not just a philosophy, it is the lens through which North Korea interprets the world. It is invoked when the nation faces sanctions, when it struggles with famine, when it builds missiles, and when it celebrates its leaders. As you drift into rest, imagine Pyongyang's Juche Tower glowing over the city at night, its eternal flame symbolizing a nation's defiance. For North Korea, Juche is not merely politics. It is destiny, woven into the very identity of the Hermit Kingdom. Part 7, Cold War North Korea, Survival Between Giants. Introduction, a small nation in a global struggle. The mid-20th century was dominated by the Cold War, a tense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, with the world divided into competing camps. For most small nations, this meant choosing one side or the other. But North Korea, under Kim Il-sung, pursued a different path. Guided by Juche, it tried to navigate between the Soviet Union and China while defying the United States and the Western Bloc. During these years, North Korea transformed from a war-ravaged state into a surprising model of socialist development, courted by countries across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Yet beneath the surface, cracks began to form, contradictions between its ideals of independence and its reliance on outside aid. Rebuilding after the Korean War. The war's devastation left North Korea with little intact. Cities in ruins, Pyongyang was nearly flattened. Population displacement. Millions dead or separated. Infrastructure, railroads, factories, and power plants destroyed. With help from the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe, North Korea embarked on rapid reconstruction. Heavy industry, steel mills, machine factories, and chemical plants built with Soviet technology. Model cities, Pyongyang reconstructed with wide boulevards, monumental buildings, and grand theaters. Agricultural reform, cooperatives established to increase production. By the 1960s, North Korea's industrial output rivaled or even surpassed that of South Korea, a fact often forgotten today. Kim Il-sung's balancing act. During the Cold War, North Korea had to navigate between its two powerful neighbors, the Soviet Union and China. Sino-Soviet split, 1960s. When Moscow and Beijing quarreled, Pyongyang refused to side completely with either. Diplomatic flexibility, Kim Il-sung extracted aid from both, presenting himself as an independent Marxist thinker. Self-reliance rhetoric. Juche was emphasized as the guiding principle to justify this balancing act. This allowed North Korea to appear independent and defiant, though in reality it relied on outside support. Military-first posture. The Korean War had convinced Kim that survival required a powerful military. Conscription, nearly universal, young men and women required to serve. Weapons production, factories built to produce rifles, artillery, and eventually missiles. Militarized society, schools, workplaces, and farms operated with military discipline. The army became not just a defense force but a pillar of society. North Korea on the global stage. Surprisingly, North Korea was admired in many parts of the developing world during the 1960s and 1970s. Aid to Africa provided training and support to liberation movements in countries like Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. Asia and the Middle East built embassies, sent military advisors, and supplied weapons to allies. Model for development. Its rapid industrialization impressed leaders in the global South. In many places, North Korea was seen as more advanced than South Korea until the 1970s. Domestic life in the Cold War era. Inside North Korea, life was rigid but stable. Work units, citizens organized into collective units for farming, factories, or neighborhoods. Housing, families received state-assigned apartments, often small but modern compared to the war years. Education, schools emphasized loyalty, science, and the history of Kim Il-sung's guerrilla struggle. Culture, films, music, and literature tightly controlled, always reinforcing Juche and the great leader. Daily life was austere but, compared to the famine of the 1990s that would later come, relatively secure. The cult of personality deepens. During the Cold War years, Kim Il-sung's image became nearly divine. Portraits in homes, hung alongside the national flag. Mandatory oaths, citizens pledged loyalty each morning at workplaces. Stories of miracles. Propaganda credited Kim with genius, wisdom, and supernatural foresight. By the 1970s, the cult had expanded to include his son, Kim Jong-il, preparing for dynastic succession. Growing tensions with the West. Throughout the Cold War, North Korea remained hostile to the United States and South Korea. DMZ incidents, armed clashes and infiltration attempts occurred along the border. The Pueblo Incident, 1968. North Korea captured a U.S. spy ship, heightening tensions. Assassination attempt, 1968. North Korean commandos tried to kill South Korea's president in Seoul. Such bold actions reinforced North Korea's reputation as unpredictable and dangerous. Cracks beneath the surface. Despite appearances of strength, problems grew in the 1970s and 1980s. Economic stagnation, industries fell behind as South Korea surged ahead with export-driven growth. Dependence on aid, North Korea relied on cheap oil and loans from the USSR and China. Isolation costs. Its refusal to integrate into global markets left it vulnerable. The very philosophy of Juche, while symbolically powerful, left the country rigid and brittle in practice. Closing reflection. The Cold War era was a paradox for North Korea. On one hand, it stood tall, balancing between superpowers, admired by parts of the developing world, and building a disciplined, militarized society. On the other, it planted the seeds of future crisis, economic stagnation, over-reliance on allies, and rigid control that would later falter. As you drift into sleep, picture Pyongyang in the 1970s, new factories humming, parades filling Kim Il-sung Square, and the glowing Juche flame above the skyline. This was a time when North Korea seemed strong, yet beneath the pride lay fragility that would one day be exposed. Part 8, The Era of Kim Jong-il, Famine, Film, and the Military First State. Introduction. The dear leader takes power. When Kim Il-sung died in 1994, the nation he had built stood at a crossroads. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his dynasty. Power passed to his son, Kim Jong-il, the first hereditary succession in a socialist state. To outsiders, it seemed unthinkable. To North Koreans, conditioned by decades of the great leader's cult, it was a natural continuation. Kim Jong-il's rule was defined by paradox. He projected the image of a confident, charismatic leader while presiding over famine, economic collapse, and deepening isolation. Yet he also tightened his grip, using propaganda, culture, and the military-first policy to maintain control. Grooming the successor. Kim Jong-il's rise was carefully prepared long before 1994. The 1970s, his image began appearing in state media, always alongside his father. Titles, named Dear Leader, Chin Jangun, to complement Kim Il-sung's Great Leader. Cult expansion. Poems, songs, and paintings celebrated his genius, especially in the arts and military. Propaganda stories, tales spread of his birth on sacred Mount Piktu, heralded by a double rainbow and a new star. By the time Kim Il-sung died, the people were ready, or compelled, to accept his son as the natural heir. The arduous march, famine of the 1990s. Kim Jong-il's early years in power were dominated by catastrophe. Collapse of the USSR. With the Soviet Union's fall in 1991, North Korea lost its largest source of aid, oil, and trade. Floods and droughts, natural disasters in 1995 and 1996 devastated harvests. Famine, known as the Arduous March, this famine killed an estimated hundreds of thousands to over 2 million people. Daily life became a struggle for survival. Families boiled grass, tree bark, and roots. Orphans wandered the countryside, searching for food. Entire villages emptied, with starvation claiming the old and young alike. The government maintained propaganda, insisting that sacrifice was necessary to defend the revolution. The Songun policy, military first. In response to crisis, Kim Jong-il elevated the military to the center of society. Songun, military first, policy, declared that the Korean People's Army was the pillar of the nation. Resources prioritized. Even during famine, the army received food, fuel, and equipment. Societal role. Soldiers took on civilian projects, farming, construction, and even cultural displays. This policy gave the regime stability. The military, well-fed and loyal, became both defender and enforcer. Control through culture. Kim Jong-il, the film director. Kim Jong-il was famously fascinated with cinema. Film studio oversight, personally supervised North Korea's film industry, editing scripts and directing propaganda films. Kidnapping incident. In 1978, North Korea abducted South Korean director Shin Sang-ok and actress Choi Eun-hee, forcing them to make films for the regime. Cultural obsession. Kim collected thousands of foreign films, reportedly including Hollywood blockbusters. Film was not entertainment, it was a tool to reinforce loyalty, glorify the Kims, and vilify enemies. Diplomacy and isolation. The 1990s and early 2000s saw North Korea oscillating between outreach and defiance. Nuclear ambitions withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1993, sparking international crises. Sunshine Policy, 1998 to 2007. South Korea under Presidents Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun pursued engagement, leading to historic summits. Aid dependence. International food aid from the UN and NGOs kept millions alive during famine years. Yet Kim Jong-il framed every negotiation as a victory of Juche, portraying North Korea as bargaining from strength. Daily life under Kim Jong-il. Life in the late 1990s and 2000s was marked by contrast. Pyongyang elite lived with electricity, imported luxuries, and propaganda theaters. Countryside suffered food shortages, surveillance, and forced loyalty sessions. Markets, Jangmadang informal black markets grew, where families bartered goods to survive, slowly reshaping the economy from below. Ordinary people adapted, creating networks of survival in a system officially denying their existence. Nuclear brinkmanship. Kim Jong-il perfected the art of brinkmanship. Missile tests demonstrated growing military capability, alarming neighbors. 2006, North Korea conducted its first nuclear test. Diplomatic pattern: create crisis, secure international attention, extract aid or concessions, repeat. This cycle reinforced North Korea's image as unpredictable, yet it ensured survival in a hostile world. The myth of Kim Jong-il. Despite hardship, propaganda elevated him to near-divine status. Supernatural tales. Claimed he invented a new golf technique, wrote hundreds of books, and commanded military genius. Sacred birth. Official biography insisted he was born on Mount Pitu, with cosmic signs of destiny. Artistic genius, credited as a master of architecture, opera, and literature. The cult was both absurd and deadly serious, a system of control that filled every space of public life. Closing reflection. Kim Jong-il's rule was an era of contradictions. It was marked by famine and isolation, yet also by nuclear breakthroughs. It saw suffering in villages and markets, yet also elaborate parades in Pyongyang. It cultivated a fragile state that survived, against all odds, through propaganda, military-first policy, and sheer defiance. As you rest, picture the dim countryside of the 1990s, where families gathered roots to survive, contrasted with the glowing boulevards of Pyongyang, where citizens marched in choreographed praise of the dear leader. This was Kim Jong-il's North Korea. A nation both starving and unyielding, shaped by hardship into the fortress state we know today. Part 9, The Arduous March, A Nation in Famine. Introduction, a time of hunger and shadows. In the mid-1990s, North Korea entered the most devastating crisis in its modern history. Known officially as the Arduous March, this period of famine and collapse claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. The very survival of the state was at stake. Yet in true North Korean fashion, this tragedy was reshaped into a narrative of sacrifice, resilience, and loyalty to the leadership. To outsiders, the famine revealed the fragility of the system. To North Koreans, it became both a trauma and a myth, remembered in silence and propaganda alike. Collapse of the old order. The famine was not a single event but the result of converging crises. Soviet Union's fall, 1991. With the collapse of its ally, North Korea lost vital oil, aid, and trade. Economic stagnation. Years of isolation and rigid central planning left the system brittle. Natural disasters, floods in 1995, followed by drought, devastated crops. Energy shortages, without fuel, tractors rusted, and irrigation pumps stopped. The public distribution system, PDS, which had fed the population for decades, collapsed. Families no longer received rations. Hunger spread like wildfire. The face of famine. Life during the arduous march was a daily struggle for survival. Urban collapse, cities went dark as electricity failed. Factories stood idle. Empty markets, state stores had nothing to sell. People bartered clothing, furniture, or tools for scraps of food. Starvation, children's bellies swelled from malnutrition. Orphans roamed train stations, becoming known as kajibi, flower swallows. Diet of desperation, grass, tree bark, corn husks, and roots boiled into thin gruel. The famine reshaped society, stripping away normalcy and leaving only the fight for survival. Survival strategies. North Koreans developed quiet methods of survival. Jangmadang, markets, informal black markets emerged, where families traded whatever they could. These markets later became permanent, changing North Korea's economy. Barter networks, people exchanged household items for rice or corn. Stealth farming, families planted hidden crops on hillsides, stealing away from state fields to tend private plots. Migration, some walked to the Chinese border, risking arrest or death, to find food. Survival depended on ingenuity and luck. The role of the state. The government framed the famine as a patriotic struggle. Propaganda language, officially called the Arduous March, evoking guerrilla hardships of Kim Il-sung's youth. Sacrifice narrative, citizens told to endure hunger as part of defending socialism. Selective aid distribution, elites and military received food first, ensuring regime survival. While international aid organizations eventually entered, the government carefully controlled their access, often channeling resources to secure loyalty. International aid and isolation. Despite its rhetoric, North Korea accepted international aid. United Nations and NGOs shipped food, medicine, and fertilizer. South Korea's role, under the Sunshine Policy, Seoul sent shipments north. Suspicion, aid workers were monitored, and access restricted to showcase resilience rather than desperation. The regime balanced between necessity and ideology, accepting aid while insisting famine was proof of external hostility. The human toll. Estimates of the famine's death toll vary, but most scholars place it in the hundreds of thousands to over 2 million. Families decimated by starvation. Entire villages abandoned. Generations scarred physically and psychologically. To this day, many North Koreans who grew up in the 1990s carry memories of hunger as their defining childhood experience. Seeds of change, the market economy emerges. Ironically, the famine planted the roots of change. Jangmadang markets, what began as survival bartering grew into semi-legal marketplaces. Women as traders, with men tied to state jobs, women led the rise of informal commerce, reshaping gender roles. Hybrid economy, the state turned a blind eye, recognizing that markets kept people alive. The North Korean economy today, while still centrally controlled, bears the legacy of this grassroots adaptation. Memory and silence. Inside North Korea, the famine is remembered carefully. Official narrative, taught as a time of heroic struggle against foreign enemies and natural disasters. Personal silence, many survivors avoid speaking of it, fearful of punishment or overwhelmed by trauma. Defector testimonies, outside the country, stories of famine survival have revealed the depth of suffering to the world. The arduous march remains a national scar, acknowledged but reframed. Closing reflection. The arduous march was a crucible for North Korea. It revealed the fragility of the state, yet also the resilience of its people. It tightened the regime's grip while forcing the population to develop survival strategies outside state control. As you close your eyes, imagine the quiet hillsides of the 1990s, where families planted hidden crops by moonlight, the darkened cities, where candles flickered in apartments without power, and the faces of children, hungry but enduring. This was the arduous march, an era of hardship that still shadows North Korea today. Part 10, Daily Life in Pyongyang, Showcase of the Nation. Introduction, a capital unlike the rest. To understand North Korea, one must understand Pyongyang. The capital is not just a city, it is a carefully curated stage upon which the state projects its power, culture, and ideology. Unlike the rural countryside, where hardship often defines existence, Pyongyang is a privileged space, reserved for the loyal and politically trusted. Here, monumental architecture, parades, and symbols of Juche stand side by side with carefully managed daily routines. Life in Pyongyang is unlike life anywhere else in North Korea, and its uniqueness reveals much about how the regime seeks to shape its image at home and abroad. The Gatekeeper City. Not every North Korean can live in Pyongyang. Songbun system, citizens are classified into social categories: loyal, wavering, or hostile, based on family background and political reliability. Only the most trusted are allowed residence in the capital. Privilege of address. A Pyongyang address is a mark of status, signaling loyalty to the regime. Control of movement. Citizens from outside cannot freely enter the city, permits are required. Thus, Pyongyang is both home and showcase, populated by those the regime trusts to embody its ideals. The landscape of power. Walking through Pyongyang, one is struck by its scale. Wide boulevards, built for parades, not traffic. Monumental architecture, the Juche Tower, the Arch of Triumph, the Mansudi Grand Monument. Kim Il-sung Square, the heart of political spectacle, where thousands march in perfect synchrony. Empty aesthetic, streets often appear sparsely populated, a deliberate contrast to the bustling chaos of other Asian capitals. The city is a living museum of ideology, where every building is meant to inspire awe and loyalty. Housing and everyday living. Housing in Pyongyang reflects privilege. Apartments, citizens live in high-rise apartment blocks assigned by the state. Amenities. Better than in the countryside, access to running water, electricity, though still unreliable, and central heating. Distribution, food rations distributed through workplace or neighborhood units, though shortages still occur. While hardship exists, Pyongyangites enjoy relative comfort compared to those outside the capital. Transportation in the showcase capital. Getting around Pyongyang is itself a performance of state pride. Pyongyang Metro, among the deepest in the world, doubling as bomb shelters. Stations adorned with chandeliers, murals, and revolutionary art. Trams and buses, public transport heavily used, though often overcrowded. Cars, rare, mostly reserved for officials. Wide roads often look empty. Bicycles, common for ordinary citizens, though once restricted as a sign of lower status. Even transport reflects inequality and ideology, grand design mixed with scarcity. Work and routine. Daily life in Pyongyang follows strict patterns. Work units. Citizens assigned to factories, offices, or cultural institutions. Morning gatherings, workers line up for ideological instruction before beginning tasks. Productivity reports, constant pressure to meet quotas, framed as service to the leader. Long hours, work extends beyond the factory floor to mandatory political meetings and rehearsals for parades. Life is labor, and labor is loyalty. Education and youth in Pyongyang. Children and youth are raised to embody the ideals of Juche. Kindergartens and schools, filled with portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Curriculum, history taught as heroic struggle led by the Kim family. Science and math mixed with ideology. Extracurriculars, music, dance, and sports heavily emphasized for mass performances. University, Kim Il-sung University and other institutions groom future elites. From early childhood, Pyongyang's youth are trained not just in knowledge, but in loyalty. Culture and leisure. Despite discipline, Pyongyang offers curated cultural life. Theaters and concert halls, frequent performances glorify the regime. Mass games, thousands perform synchronized gymnastics and card displays, often for foreign visitors. Sports, the Rungrado 1st of May Stadium, the world's largest, hosts soccer, parades, and mass spectacles. Parks and zoos, families visit on weekends, though these outings are often staged for tourists. Every cultural experience is infused with political messaging. The presence of the leader. Life in Pyongyang is lived under the gaze of the Kim family. Statues and murals. Citizens bow before colossal statues of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Portraits in homes, mandatory, cleaned daily with special cloths. Media, newspapers, radio, and television praise the leader constantly. Public rituals. On holidays, citizens join mass ceremonies to honor the Kims. The leader is not absent in daily life, he is omnipresent. Foreign visitors and controlled image. Pyongyang is also the stage upon which foreigners glimpse North Korea. Guided tours, visitors see model schools, tidy parks, and bustling shops carefully curated for display. Staged normalcy, supermarkets stocked with goods, though inaccessible to ordinary citizens, shown to tourists as proof of abundance. Restricted interaction, foreigners cannot freely speak with locals, ensuring the illusion remains intact. Pyongyang is the shop window of the Hermit Kingdom. Contrasts with the countryside. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Pyongyang is its contrast with life elsewhere. Relative abundance. While rural areas struggle with food and electricity, Pyongyang receives priority. Symbolic divide. Pyongyang embodies loyalty and privilege, the countryside represents survival and sacrifice. Unseen hardship. Even in the capital, scarcity lurks, blackouts, food shortages, and whispered discontent. The city is both reality and performance, masking the harsher truths beyond its borders. Closing reflection. Daily life in Pyongyang is life on a stage. It is disciplined, curated, and infused with ideology. For its residents, it offers privilege compared to the countryside, but also constant surveillance and ritualized loyalty. For the world, it projects the image North Korea once seen, a disciplined, proud, independent society. As you close your eyes, imagine Pyongyang at dawn, the sound of loudspeakers playing revolutionary songs, children walking to school in neat red scarves, workers marching to factories under banners of Juche, and the ever-present gaze of the Kims towering above. This is Pyongyang, the beating heart of the Hermit Kingdom. Part 11, Life in the Countryside, Fields of Hardship and Resilience. Introduction, the forgotten half of the nation. While Pyongyang gleams with monuments, wide boulevards, and choreographed parades, the vast majority of North Koreans live in the countryside. Here, life is stripped of spectacle and shaped instead by soil, weather, and relentless labor. Farming villages are the backbone of the nation's food supply, yet they are also the sites of its greatest struggles, scarcity, surveillance, and sacrifice. Understanding life in rural North Korea reveals the stark contrast between the privileged capital and the neglected provinces, as well as the extraordinary resilience of ordinary people. Villages on the land. North Korea's countryside consists of small villages scattered among mountains, valleys, and rice paddies. Collective farms, most villagers belong to state-run cooperatives. Families work assigned plots as part of larger brigades. Houses, modest one-story homes with tile roofs, often without running water or steady electricity. Community layout, villages cluster around schools, work units, and sometimes a cultural hall or cooperative store. The landscape is peaceful, yet life here is far from idyllic. Agriculture and labor. Farming in North Korea is not just work, it is a duty to the state. Manual labor, with little machinery, farmers rely on hand tools, oxen, and sheer human effort. Rice and corn, staple crops, though vulnerable to floods and drought. Work brigades, farmers organized into groups, monitored by local officials for productivity and loyalty. Long hours, planting and harvest seasons demand dawn-to-dusk labor, often understate slogans urging sacrifice. Despite their toil, farmers rarely keep what they grow. Most produce is requisitioned by the state. The distribution system. Food and resources are controlled through the Public Distribution System, PDS. Urban priority, cities, especially Pyongyang, receive higher rations. Rural scarcity, farmers often receive less, even though they grow the food. Shortages, when PDS fails, villagers must improvise, bartering, foraging, or secretly cultivating private plots. For many, survival means living between official policy and quiet improvisation. Women as providers. In rural areas, women often carry the heaviest burden. Work in fields, women labor alongside men, planting and harvesting. Family care, after farm work, they cook, gather firewood, and tend to children. Market activity, many women secretly engage in small-scale trade, selling surplus produce or homemade goods in local markets. This dual role, worker and caretaker, makes rural women central to survival. Education in the countryside. Children in villages attend local schools, though conditions are modest. Curriculum, a mix of basic subjects and ideological training focused on loyalty to the Kim family. Facilities, often poorly equipped, with outdated textbooks and limited supplies. Work participation, children join seasonal farming duties, helping with planting and harvest. Schooling is thus intertwined with labor, reinforcing both ideology and necessity. Scarcity and resilience. Daily life in rural areas is defined by scarcity. Fuel shortages. Families burn wood, coal, or dried corn stalks for heat. Electricity, rarely reliable, evenings lit by candles or kerosene lamps. Food, diets often limited to corn porridge, kimchi, and occasional vegetables. Meat is rare. Yet villagers endure, building networks of support and sharing among families. Surveillance and control. Even in remote villages, the state's gaze is present. In Minban units, neighborhood groups monitor loyalty, attendance at political meetings, and adherence to rules. Local officials enforce quotas, supervise farming, and report disobedience. Propaganda sessions, weekly or daily meetings reinforce ideology, even as hunger gnaws at bellies. Survival requires not only endurance but careful conformity. Contrasts with Pyongyang. The differences between Pyongyang and the countryside are stark. Food security, Pyongyang residents, though not immune to shortages, fare better. Villagers scrape by on less. Amenities. City apartments may have unreliable electricity, but villages often have none. Visibility, foreign visitors see only the capital, rural poverty remains hidden. This divide creates two Koreas within one, the displayed and the concealed. The spirit of the countryside. Despite hardship, rural life carries resilience. Community bonds, families share food, tools, and labor. Cultural traditions, folk songs, dances, and shamanistic practices survive quietly in villages. Pride in survival, farmers see themselves as sustaining the nation, even when unrecognized. For many, endurance itself becomes an act of dignity. Closing reflection. Life in North Korea's countryside is far from the marble monuments of Pyongyang. It is life in the fields, bent over rows of rice, waiting for rain, and making do with less. It is a life of scarcity, yet also of stubborn resilience. As you rest, imagine a quiet village beneath the mountains. Smoke rising from simple chimneys, farmers walking to the fields at dawn, children carrying buckets of water from a well. This is the unseen North Korea, where ordinary people endure in silence, shaping the true heartbeat of the nation. Part 12, Military Life and the Army First State. Introduction, The Nation in Uniform. If Pyongyang is the showcase of North Korea, and the countryside its struggling heart, then the military is its backbone. Few nations are as defined by their armed forces as North Korea. For decades, the regime has proclaimed that soldiers are not just protectors of the state but the very essence of it. This philosophy, known as Songun or military first, elevated military life to the center of politics, economy, and culture. For ordinary men and women, this means that nearly everyone's life intersects with the military, through service, training, or the endless presence of uniformed authority. The Songun policy, military first. Introduced formally by Kim Jong-il in the 1990s, Songun arose during the famine and crisis of the Arduous March. Purpose, ensure survival of the state by prioritizing the military above all else, above civilians, economy, even the party. Resources, food, fuel, and goods flowed first to soldiers, guaranteeing their loyalty. Cultural role, the army presented as the most faithful embodiment of Juche, willing to sacrifice endlessly for the leader. Songun turned North Korea into a garrison state, where military uniforms became symbols of identity. Conscription, a universal duty. Military service in North Korea is compulsory and long. Men typically serve around 10 years, sometimes longer. Women, increasingly required to serve, often until their early 20s. Recruitment, service begins at age 17 or 18, with selection ceremonies framed as patriotic rituals. Assignments range from combat units to construction brigades, farming, or even cultural troops. For many, the military defines their youth, years spent in uniform, under discipline, far from home. Life in the barracks. Daily existence as a soldier is austere. Routine, early morning drills, ideological study sessions, hours of physical labor. Food, soldiers receive priority, but rations are still limited, meals of rice, corn, kimchi, and occasional fish. Clothing, uniforms are often worn until threadbare, patched repeatedly. Hierarchy, strict discipline, infractions punished with harsh penalties, sometimes imprisonment in military prisons. Yet soldiers are taught to endure with pride, told they are the vanguard of the revolution. Soldiers beyond the battlefield. Unlike many armies, North Korea's military is not confined to defense. Construction brigades, soldiers build roads, railways, and even housing. Farming units, assigned to collective farms, ensuring food supply. Cultural performances, military bands and art troupes perform patriotic works. Political enforcers. Soldiers sometimes used to suppress dissent or enforce control over civilians. The army is not just a defense force, it is the labor force, police, and cultural engine of the nation. The militarization of society. Songun extends beyond barracks into every aspect of civilian life. Schooling, children trained in basic drills, many participate in paramilitary youth organizations. Public spaces, statues, slogans, and posters glorify the army as national heroes. Civil defense, civilians often drilled for wartime scenarios, gas mask training, evacuation practice, or trench digging. The line between civilian and soldier blurs, creating a society where everyone is part of the defense machine. Women in the army. Women's roles in the military have grown significantly. Mandatory service, extended to most young women, though with shorter terms than men. Roles, serve as medics, clerks, border guards, and sometimes in combat units. Challenges. Harsh living conditions, long separations from family, and reports of abuse. For women, military service is both a burden and a potential path to advancement in a rigid society. The army and the leader. Above all, the military is loyal to the Kim dynasty. Symbolic unity, soldiers swear oaths not to the nation, but to the supreme leader. Propaganda, the army is portrayed as the shield of Kim Jong-il, then Kim Jong-un. Parades, military parades in Pyongyang serve as both intimidation abroad and devotion at home. The army's true mission is not only national defense but also regime preservation. Nuclear weapons and the army. In the 21st century, the military's role expanded to nuclear development. Nuclear scientists and soldiers work hand in hand under the Korean People's Army. National pride, propaganda depicts nuclear weapons as ultimate proof of Songun's success. Deterrence, the army's strength portrayed as the reason North Korea survives against imperialist enemies. The nuclear arsenal became the pinnacle of the army's identity, proof that even a small nation could defy superpowers. Daily life for families of soldiers. Families of conscripts live in a different rhythm. Pride and sacrifice, sending children to the army is considered the highest act of loyalty. Letters and visits, communication rare, visits limited, adding emotional strain. Community recognition, families of soldiers often receive higher social standing or privileges. Yet beneath pride lies the quiet worry of long absences and uncertainty. Closing reflection. Life in North Korea's military is life in service of the state. It is disciplined, austere, and all-consuming. Soldiers are fed before civilians, but they also bear the greatest burden: long service, harsh conditions, and constant ideological pressure. As you drift to sleep, imagine rows of soldiers marching through Pyongyang's Kim Il-sung Square, boots striking pavement in perfect unison, flags waving under the watchful gaze of portraits. For these young men and women, life is not their own, it belongs to the leader, the party, and the endless doctrine of Sangin. Part 13, Culture and the Arts, the Stage of Ideology. Introduction, Art as Politics, Politics as Art. In most societies, art is a reflection of creativity, individuality, and expression. In North Korea, however, art is something more. It is a weapon of ideology, a tool to inspire loyalty, and a stage upon which the story of the Kims and Juche is performed again and again. From cinema to theater, painting to music, culture in North Korea is shaped not by the free flow of ideas, but by the state's desire to educate, inspire, and control. Yet within these constraints, the arts have developed a distinctive character, grand, dramatic, and uniquely North Korean. Kim Jong-il and the Artist's Throne. Few leaders in modern history have involved themselves in the arts as deeply as Kim Jong-il. Personal obsession. From the 1970s onward, Kim oversaw literature, film, and music production. On the Art of Cinema, 1973. His treatise laid out strict principles for film, emphasizing revolutionary themes, emotional appeal, and glorification of the Kims. Micromanagement, scripts, costumes, and even actor gestures often approved directly by Kim. His fascination with culture was not about aesthetics, it was about propaganda. Film, the silver screen of revolution. North Korea's film industry is one of the most carefully controlled in the world. Heroic narratives, films typically feature brave workers, soldiers, or farmers, guided by the wisdom of the leader. Villains, often depicted as greedy capitalists, corrupt officials, or foreign enemies. Patriotic epics, works such as Sea of Blood or The Flower Girl became cultural landmarks, performed both on screen and stage. Kidnapped talent. In 1978, South Korean director Shin Sang-ok and actress Choi Eun-hee were abducted to improve North Korea's cinematic quality. For citizens, films are not mere entertainment, they are moral lessons. Music and song. Voices of loyalty. Music plays a constant role in North Korean life. Revolutionary songs, stirring marches praising Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and later Kim Jong-un. Choral power, large choirs and military bands dominate performances, emphasizing collective unity over individual expression. The Moranbong Band, formed under Kim Jong-un, mixing traditional revolutionary themes with modern styles, appealing to younger audiences. Daily soundtrack, loudspeakers in villages and workplaces broadcast patriotic songs throughout the day. Music is never neutral, it is always devotional. Theater and opera, the stage of revolution. Theater and opera hold special places in North Korean culture. Revolutionary operas, Sea of Blood and The Flower Girl, multi-hour productions that retell national struggles. Mass participation, students, workers, and soldiers often recruited for grand performances. Message, stories always highlight loyalty, resilience, and the eternal wisdom of the Kims. Performances are not just art, they are lessons in patriotism. Mass games, the ultimate spectacle. Perhaps the most famous cultural expression of North Korea is the mass games. Scale, tens of thousands of participants performing synchronized gymnastics, dances, and human mosaics. Precision, months of rehearsal ensure perfect timing and unity. Backdrops, card-flipping displays create images of Kim Il-sung, Juche symbols, or patriotic slogans. Tourist attraction, once open to foreign visitors, these spectacles showcased North Korea's discipline and devotion. The mass games are both breathtaking and haunting, a nation's body moving as one. Visual arts, socialist realism with a North Korean twist. Paintings, murals, and monuments cover the country. Heroic imagery, workers, farmers, and soldiers depicted with exaggerated strength and optimism. The leaders, always painted larger, brighter, and central in every composition. Murals in villages. Even the smallest towns feature revolutionary art, ensuring propaganda is ever present. Monumental sculpture, the Mansudi Art Studio produces massive statues, including those exported to other countries as cultural diplomacy. The style is always grand, idealized, and moralistic. Literature, revolutionary storytelling. Books and stories are another form of indoctrination. Themes, the triumph of the revolution, the evils of imperialism, and the virtue of loyalty. Children's books feature young heroes who demonstrate courage by obeying the leader. Kim family works, official writings of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il treated as sacred texts, studied in schools and workplaces. Literature is less about imagination and more about instruction. Leisure and everyday culture. Even ordinary pastimes are infused with ideology. Festivals, national holidays celebrated with parades, music, and fireworks. Sports, matches and events framed as proof of national strength. Parks and recreation. Families picnic beneath monuments or visit museums devoted to the revolution. Leisure in North Korea is always tied to collective pride. Closing reflection. Culture and the arts in North Korea are not free-flowing expressions of individuality but carefully orchestrated performances of loyalty. Whether on the stage, screen, or streets, every artistic act is infused with ideology, serving the dual purpose of entertainment and indoctrination. As you close your eyes, imagine the spectacle of the mass games, thousands of children moving in perfect harmony, forming the face of Kim Il-sung across a stadium backdrop. For North Koreans, art is not a question of beauty or taste. It is the lifeblood of loyalty, the eternal chorus of Juche. Part 14, Religion and Belief, From Spirits to the Cult of the Kims. Introduction, Faith Transformed. Korean history is steeped in spiritual traditions. Shamanism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Christianity all shape the culture of the peninsula. Yet in North Korea, religion has undergone a dramatic transformation. What was once a landscape of temples, shrines, and churches has become a land where official faith is replaced by the worship of the Kim dynasty. This chapter explores the story of belief in North Korea, its ancient roots, the suppression of organized religion under socialism, and the creation of a new system of faith built around Juche and loyalty to the Kims. Ancient traditions, shamanism and folk belief. Before Buddhism or Confucianism, Korea's earliest spiritual foundation was shamanism. Shamans, Mudang women often served as intermediaries with spirits, conducting rituals for healing, harvest, or protection. Spirits of nature, mountains, rivers, and trees seen as inhabited by spiritual forces. Ancestor worship, reverence for family spirits tied to Confucian family structure later on. Even in modern North Korea, shamanistic practices linger quietly in rural areas, though officially condemned. Buddhism and Confucianism in Korea. By the first millennium CE, Buddhism had flourished in the peninsula. Temples, built across the land, many in the north still survive as historical sites. Art and architecture, Buddhist imagery influenced Korean sculpture, painting, and architecture. Monastic life, monks played cultural and educational roles. Confucianism, introduced later, became central during the Joseon dynasty. Ethics and order, emphasized hierarchy, loyalty, and family duty. Impact, shaped governance and social norms deeply, elements of which remain even in North Korea's emphasis on obedience. Christianity in Korea. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Christianity spread rapidly in Korea. Pyongyang's title, known as the Jerusalem of the East, filled with churches and missionaries. Education and activism. Christian schools and leaders played key roles in anti-Japanese resistance. Legacy. Christianity flourished especially in the North before 1945. This vibrant Christian heritage was later almost entirely erased in North Korea. The communist suppression of religion. When North Korea was founded, religion was seen as a threat. Marxist atheism, religion dismissed as superstition and opium of the people. Confiscation, temples, churches, and shrines closed or repurposed. Persecution, clergy arrested, believers imprisoned or executed. Underground faith, some Christians continued worship in secret, at great risk. Religion was replaced by a new creed, loyalty to Kim Il-sung. The cult of the Kims as faith. Instead of gods, North Korea gave its people new divine figures, the Kims. Sacred leaders, Kim Il-sung as eternal president, Kim Jong-il as dear leader, Kim Jong-un as his successor. Sacred texts, speeches and writings of the Kims studied like holy scripture. Sacred rituals, citizens bow before statues and portraits, akin to religious devotion. Sacred places. Birthplaces, battlefields, and tombs of the Kims treated as pilgrimage sites. The state created a civil religion, blending nationalism, ideology, and personality worship. Juche as a spiritual system. Though described as political, Juche functions like a faith. Doctrine teaches that the Korean people are masters of their destiny, guided by the leader. Symbols, the Juche Tower stands like a religious monument, flame eternal at its peak. Ceremonies, citizens participate in rituals of loyalty that resemble prayer. In practice, Juche fills the role once held by Buddhism, Confucianism, or Christianity. Officially tolerated religions. North Korea maintains the appearance of religious tolerance for propaganda. Show churches in Pyongyang, a handful of Christian and Buddhist sites kept for foreign visitors, heavily monitored. Korean Christian Federation, state-run, more political than spiritual. Controlled Buddhism, some temples operate, but monks are state employees, not independent clergy. These institutions are stage-managed to suggest freedom of faith, though true belief remains tightly restricted. Quiet persistence of faith. Despite repression, traces of belief survive. Shamanism, still practiced discreetly in rural villages, especially for healing. Underground Christianity, secret gatherings exist, though discovery brings severe punishment. Private rituals, families maintain ancestor veneration, blending culture and spirituality quietly. Faith has not vanished, it has simply gone underground. Closing reflection. Religion in North Korea is a story of transformation. Ancient shamanism, Buddhist temples, Confucian ethics, and Christian churches all gave way to the state religion of the Kim dynasty. Faith did not disappear, it was repurposed, redirected, and woven into the ideology of Juche. As you drift into sleep, imagine Pyongyang's skyline, where temples once stood, now towers of Juche rise, where church bells once rang, now propaganda songs fill the air. In North Korea, belief lives on, not in gods or saints, but in the eternal gaze of its leaders. Part 15, Fun Facts about North Korea, Quirks of the Hermit Kingdom. Introduction, the odd side of a closed world. When people think of North Korea, they often imagine solemn parades, nuclear brinkmanship, and propaganda slogans. Yet within this strict system exists a surprisingly colorful set of facts, quirks, and traditions that make the country unlike any other on Earth. From unusual calendars to massive stadiums, from peculiar laws to strange symbols, these fun facts reveal both the creativity and contradictions of North Korea. This chapter lightens the tone, collecting the fascinating details that shape daily life and culture, while still offering a reflective and calming narration. The Juche calendar. Year 0, North Korea measures time from Kim Il-sung's birth in 1912. Juche 1, thus, 1912 is the first year of the Juche calendar. Dual dating. Official documents often carry both Gregorian and Juche years, reinforcing the centrality of the Kims even in time itself. For example, the year 2025 is Juche 114. World's largest stadium. Rungrado 1st of May Stadium, located in Pyongyang, it can seat up to 150,000 spectators, making it the largest stadium in the world. Uses: hosts parades, soccer matches, and the famous mass games. Design: its 16 arches resemble a magnolia flower, Korea's national blossom. The stadium is as much a political stage as a sports venue. Only a handful of hairstyles allowed. Restricted haircuts: official guidelines permit a limited set of approved hairstyles for men and women. Uniformity: this reinforces conformity, discouraging Western or individualistic styles. Exceptions: elite performers and propaganda icons sometimes enjoy greater variety. Even hair becomes part of ideological discipline. Pyongyang Metro, a palace underground. Depth: among the deepest metro systems in the world, built to double as bomb shelters. Design: chandeliers, mosaics, and murals celebrating workers and soldiers adorn the stations. Access: for years, foreigners were only allowed to see 2 stations. Today, tours reveal more, but still selectively. The metro is both practical and symbolic, a palace for the people underground. The Arch of Triumph, bigger than Paris. Construction: built in 1982 to honor Kim Il-sung's resistance against Japan. Size: stands 60 meters tall, larger than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Symbolism: every dimension encodes revolutionary anniversaries. Size, as always in Pyongyang, is meant to inspire awe. Basketball's surprising popularity. Imported by diplomats, basketball is a favorite sport, unusual compared to other socialist nations. Special rules: North Korea has experimented with unique scoring variations in games. Celebrity visit: former NBA star Dennis Rodman famously visited, befriending Kim Jong-il. Sports, though limited, offer rare windows to the outside world. Traffic ladies instead of stoplights. Blue-uniformed women, known for directing traffic with precise, robotic gestures. Symbol of Pyongyang, once iconic, though now increasingly replaced by traffic lights. Elegance: their style and discipline are celebrated in propaganda. Even traffic direction once carried ceremonial flair. Beer culture and breweries. Taedonggang beer, produced in a brewery purchased from Britain, dismantled, and shipped to Pyongyang. Home brewing, common in villages due to scarcity of other alcohol. Beer festivals: at times, Pyongyang has hosted state-sanctioned beer celebrations. Beer is one of the few indulgences openly enjoyed across society. The calendar of eternal leaders. Kim Il-sung as eternal president, even after his death in 1994, his title remains permanent. Kim Jong-il memorials: his death in 2011 created new rituals of mourning. National holidays. Both leaders' birthdays are celebrated as Day of the Sun, Kim Il-sung, and Day of the Shining Star, Kim Jong-il. The leadership exists outside of time, eternal and untouchable. The empty roads. Few cars, despite massive boulevards, traffic is sparse. Elite privilege: most cars belong to officials or state organizations. Cycling and walking, the true transportation of the masses. Pyongyang's wide roads symbolize grandeur, not practicality. Closing reflection. North Korea is a land of paradoxes, stern and solemn, yet filled with quirks that astonish outsiders. Its unique facts, about calendars, sports, beer, or metro stations, are not trivial oddities but expressions of a system that controls even the smallest details of life while creating a stage of uniqueness. As you close your eyes, imagine the quiet grandeur of the Pyongyang metro, chandeliers gleaming underground, or the empty boulevards where a lone cyclist passes beneath monumental arches. These small details, strange and fascinating, tell us as much about North Korea as its politics or parades. Part 16, Tourism in North Korea, a carefully curated journey. Introduction: the world's most controlled vacation. Traveling to North Korea is not like traveling anywhere else on Earth. Every step is choreographed, every site selected, every conversation monitored. Foreign visitors are not free explorers, they are guests in a carefully curated theater, shown what the regime wants them to see and shielded from what it does not. Tourism, though limited, serves a dual purpose for North Korea. It provides foreign currency and, perhaps more importantly, offers a stage to showcase the image of the hermit kingdom it wants projected to the outside world. Who can visit? While the majority of the world's citizens can technically apply for a visa, access is restricted. Tour agencies: visitors must book through government-approved agencies, often foreign-based but working with Pyongyang's tourism bureau. Group travel. Most tourists join small guided groups, though private tours exist under heavy monitoring. Restrictions: journalists are often denied entry unless specially approved. Exceptions: citizens of South Korea and, for much of recent history, the United States, face special restrictions or outright bans. The process is designed to ensure only manageable, safe visitors arrive. Arrival in Pyongyang. Most tourists enter through Pyongyang's Sunan International Airport. First impressions: a modernized terminal greets arrivals, yet phones and laptops are inspected. Certain books or media may be confiscated. Guides assigned: visitors are met immediately by government guides, who remain with them every moment of the trip. No free movement, independent exploration is strictly forbidden, guides act as chaperones and minders. From the first step off the plane, the performance begins. The tourist itinerary, staged sites. Visitors are shown a North Korea that is orderly, proud, and monumental. Pyongyang highlights. Juche Tower with its eternal flame. Mansuri Grand Monument, where tourists are expected to bow before statues of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Kim Il-sung Square, vast and pristine. The Pyongyang Metro, with its chandeliers and murals. Outside the capital. Panmunjom, DMZ visitors peer across to South Korea under the watch of stern soldiers. Mount Myeohyang, home to the International Friendship Exhibition, showcasing gifts given to the Kims by foreign leaders. Mount Pitu, sacred birthplace myth of Kim Jong-il, sometimes offered as part of rare tours. Every site is infused with ideological significance. Hotels and controlled comforts. Tourists stay in designated hotels, often on isolated islands or compounds. Yanggakdo Hotel, one of the most famous, located on an island in Pyongyang, preventing unsupervised wanderings. Amenities, restaurants, bars, and even bowling alleys create an illusion of leisure. Isolation. Guests cannot leave the hotel without their guides. The fifth floor of the Yanggakdo, rumored to contain surveillance rooms, is off-limits. Tourist comfort exists, but always within the cage of surveillance. Interaction with locals. Tourists encounter North Koreans, but always in carefully arranged settings. Model schools, children perform songs and dances for visitors. Factories and farms, workers showcase efficiency and loyalty. Friendship exchanges, select citizens meet tourists, presenting rehearsed conversations. Spontaneous interaction is discouraged or prevented, ensuring visitors see only the approved version of North Korean life. Photography rules. Taking photos is allowed, but heavily restricted. Permitted subjects, monuments, model farms, tidy streets. Forbidden subjects, military personnel, construction sites, markets, or anything showing poverty. Guides oversight, cameras are sometimes inspected, and offending images deleted. Photography becomes part of the stage performance, reinforcing the narrative. What tourists do not see. For every site tourists are shown, countless realities remain hidden. Countryside hardships, villages with food shortages or failing infrastructure. Markets, Jangmadang informal economies where survival truly happens. Prisons, the vast network of political camps is never mentioned. Descent, no glimpse of criticism or resistance is ever possible. The curated tour is a parallel reality. Tourism as propaganda. For North Korea, tourism is not about money alone. Showcasing order, tours emphasize discipline, cleanliness, and monumental pride. Shaping perceptions, visitors often leave confused, impressed by grandeur yet unsettled by control. Narrative control, the regime ensures tourists spread an image of mystery and strength, not weakness. Even tourism becomes a political weapon. Closing reflection. Tourism in North Korea is not a window. It is a mirror, reflecting what the regime wants seen. It is a journey through curated spaces, monumental symbols, and rehearsed encounters. For tourists, it is both fascinating and unsettling, a trip into a country that performs itself with every gesture. As you rest, picture yourself walking through Pyongyang's broad boulevards, with guides at your side, hearing the echo of patriotic songs, and gazing at towering statues. You see much, yet so much more remains unseen. This is tourism in North Korea, a carefully scripted play in which every visitor becomes an audience. Part 17, Escape and Defection, Leaving the Hermit Kingdom. Introduction, a leap into the unknown. To live in North Korea is to live in a country defined by boundaries, geographic, political, and mental. To defect, to attempt escape, is to leap across those boundaries into the unknown. For those who flee, the journey is perilous, filled with danger, betrayal, and uncertainty. Yet despite the risks, thousands of North Koreans have tried, driven by hunger, fear, or hope for a different life. This chapter tells the story of escape, the geography that makes it so difficult, the clandestine networks that make it possible, and the challenges defectors face even after reaching freedom. The geography of confinement. North Korea is ringed by barriers that make escape nearly impossible. Southern border, the demilitarized zone, DMZ, with South Korea is the most heavily fortified border in the world. Landmines, barbed wire, and armed guards stretch across its length. Crossing here is nearly suicidal. Eastern and western seas, the coasts are patrolled, attempts to flee by boat are rare and dangerous. Northern border, most escapees flee into China across the Yalu or Tumun rivers. Though less fortified, this frontier is still risky, guards patrol, and the rivers are treacherous in both freezing winter and summer floods. Geography itself conspires to keep North Koreans inside. Why people escape. The decision to flee is never taken lightly. Hunger. Many defectors during the 1990s famine risked escape simply to find food in China. Freedom. Others sought to escape relentless control, dreaming of self-determination. Family reunification. Some fled in hopes of rejoining relatives in South Korea or elsewhere. Persecution. Political prisoners and religious believers often attempted flight to escape repression. For each, escape was not just leaving a country, it was leaving an entire system of life. The role of China. First step, not safety. Crossing into China is usually the first step for defectors, but it is not safety. Illegal status. China does not recognize North Koreans as refugees, treating them instead as economic migrants. Constant threat. Defectors caught in China are often repatriated to North Korea, where they face imprisonment, torture, or execution. Exploitation. Without legal protection, many defectors are vulnerable to trafficking, forced marriages, or exploitation in underground economies. China is thus both gateway and trap. Escape routes, the Underground Railroad of Asia. To reach true safety, defectors must often travel thousands of kilometers. Safe houses, Christian groups, human rights activists, and brokers operate networks across China. Journeys south. Many aim to reach Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, or Vietnam, where they can contact South Korean embassies. Mongolia route. Some cross the Gobi Desert to Mongolia, where they can claim refugee status. Cost. Brokers charge thousands of dollars, often paid by relatives abroad. Each journey is a clandestine odyssey across rivers, forests, and borders. Punishment for failed attempts. the risks of capture are severe. Repatriation, those sent back to North Korea face harsh interrogations. Prison camps, defectors may be imprisoned in labor camps, where conditions are brutal. Collective punishment, entire families of defectors may be punished, reinforcing the danger. The cost of failure is not just personal, it is collective. Stories of escape. Every defector carries a story. Children crossing rivers, young teenagers wading across the frozen Tumun at night. Families split, parents sending children ahead, hoping they reach safety even if they themselves are caught. Solo journeys, individuals hiding in cargo trucks or walking through forests guided only by the stars. These stories reveal both desperation and extraordinary courage. Life after escape. Even after reaching safety, defectors face new challenges. South Korea, most defectors resettle here, entering a free but overwhelming society. They receive housing, education, and support, yet face stigma and culture shock. Adaptation, many struggle with technology, capitalism, and the rapid pace of modern life. Identity. Living between worlds, defectors often carry trauma from their past and difficulty adjusting to their new lives. Freedom brings relief, but also new burdens. International advocacy. Defectors have become powerful voices for change. Testimonies, speaking before governments and organizations, they reveal the realities of North Korea. Activism, groups founded by defectors smuggle information, radios, and aid back into the country. Awareness, their stories break through the isolation, connecting the world to lives otherwise unseen. Defectors carry the weight of their homeland's silence into global conversations. Closing reflection. Escape from North Korea is not simply migration, it is an act of defiance against one of the most closed systems in the world. For those who attempt it, the journey is perilous, and even in freedom, scars remain. Yet each escape tells a story of human resilience and longing for dignity. As you drift to sleep, imagine the quiet rivers of the northern border, where shadows slip across icy waters under moonlight. Each crossing is a gamble, each step into China a risk, and yet the hope of a different life drives thousands to try. These are the escapees, the defectors, the voices who remind the world of the Hermit Kingdom's hidden struggles. Part 18, North Korea in the Global Arena, Isolation and Diplomacy. Introduction, the Paradox of Isolation. North Korea calls itself the most self-reliant nation in the world, guided by Juche and the principle of independence. Yet for all its rhetoric of isolation, the country cannot exist without engaging the wider world. From the Cold War years to the nuclear crises of the 21st century, Pyongyang has learned to use diplomacy not to open itself, but to survive, manipulate, and project strength. North Korea's international presence is a story of paradox. A small, impoverished country wielding outsized influence, shaping global headlines, and keeping superpowers on edge. Cold War alignments and independence. During the early Cold War, North Korea maneuvered between allies. The Soviet Union provided industrial aid, military technology, and ideological support. China supplied manpower in the Korean War, and later a lifeline during crises. The non-aligned movement, North Korea courted countries in Africa and Asia, presenting itself as a model of anti-colonial resistance. Yet Kim Il-sung skillfully avoided dependence, maintaining a posture of independence even while accepting aid. The fall of the Soviet Union. The 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union was devastating. Economic shock, North Korea lost cheap oil and critical trade partnerships. Isolation deepened. Without Moscow's support, Pyongyang became reliant on China. Shift in diplomacy, began tentative outreach to the West, though cautiously and always on its own terms. The end of the Cold War pushed North Korea into strategic desperation. The nuclear card emerges. By the 1990s, North Korea realized its greatest diplomatic weapon was not industry or trade, but nuclear development. 1994 Agreed Framework, North Korea froze its nuclear program in exchange for aid and reactors from the US and allies. Pattern established, nuclear threats brought negotiations, concessions, and relief, until promises broke down. 2006, North Korea conducted its first nuclear test, shocking the world. From then on, nuclear weapons became the centerpiece of its global posture. Six-party talks. In the 2000s, efforts to restrain North Korea's nuclear program led to the six-party talks: China, US, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and North Korea. Temporary gains, agreements on aid and inspections occasionally reached. Breakdowns, North Korea often walked away, accusing others of betrayal. Outcome, talks collapsed by 2009, leaving the nuclear program unchecked. The cycle of diplomacy and breakdown became a defining pattern. Sanctions and survival. North Korea's nuclear ambitions brought heavy international sanctions. UN sanctions, targeted arms, luxury goods, banking, and eventually vital resources like coal and oil. Economic strain, sanctions deepened isolation, yet also spurred smuggling networks and clandestine trade. Black markets, the state turned to cyber attacks, counterfeiting, and illicit trade to generate revenue. Sanctions weakened but never toppled the regime. Instead, they became part of the survival narrative. China, the reluctant lifeline. China remains North Korea's most crucial partner. Trade partner, provides food, fuel, and economic support. Political shield, blocks extreme UN actions, preventing total isolation. Uneasy relationship. While Beijing supports stability, it also fears collapse that could bring refugees and US troops closer. North Korea relies on China, but carefully resists being seen as subordinate. Relations with the US. For decades, Pyongyang and Washington have danced between hostility and negotiation. Hostility narrative, the US depicted as imperialist enemy responsible for Korea's division. Crisis cycles, nuclear tests followed by talks, broken promises, and renewed threats. Summits. In 2018 to 2019, Kim Jong-il met US President Donald Trump in unprecedented meetings. Though dramatic, they ended without lasting agreements. For Pyongyang, the US is both adversary and essential bargaining partner. The role of South Korea. Relations with Seoul fluctuate dramatically. Sunshine Policy, 1998 to 2007 saw cooperation, economic projects like the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and family reunions. Military tensions, periodic clashes at sea and artillery exchanges across the border. Symbolic gestures, handshakes across the DMZ, joint Olympic teams, but always temporary. North Korea alternates between hostility and outreach, depending on its needs. Global diplomacy beyond the superpowers. North Korea also seeks ties beyond its immediate neighbors. Africa, built statues and sent advisors to countries like Zimbabwe and Angola. Middle East, provided military aid to Syria and Iran at times. Europe, maintains embassies in a handful of countries, often serving intelligence and trade purposes. These relationships give Pyongyang an image of global reach. Closing reflection. North Korea's place in the world is one of contradiction. Isolated, sanctioned, and impoverished, it nevertheless commands global attention. Through nuclear weapons, theatrical diplomacy, and calculated defiance, it ensures it is never ignored. As you rest, imagine the long negotiation tables at Panmunjom, the flags of 6 nations in Beijing's six-party talks, and the grand but empty promises of summits. North Korea thrives not by opening itself, but by making the world dance to its rhythm of crisis and compromise. Part 19, Technology and Isolation, North Korea's Digital Fortress. Introduction, A World Behind Walls. In the modern age, where smartphones and internet connections bind much of humanity together, North Korea exists as an island of digital isolation. Technology here does not liberate, it controls. Information does not flow freely, it is filtered, staged, and restricted. And yet, within this fortress, North Koreans still find ways to adapt. They trade USB sticks loaded with foreign dramas, navigate their tightly sealed internet, and live within a world where surveillance is constant but innovation quietly persists. This chapter explores the paradox of technology in North Korea, both a cage and, for some, a key to glimpse the outside world. The Internet, Kwangmyong. North Korea does not allow its citizens unrestricted access to the global Internet. Instead, they have Kwangmyong, an isolated intranet. Content: state-approved websites, educational resources, propaganda, and limited scientific material. Access points, found in universities, government buildings, and some privileged institutions. Appearance, resembles the early Internet of the 1990s, basic designs, heavily text-based. Purpose, provides the illusion of modernity while ensuring information control. For most citizens, Kwangmyong is their only experience of being online. State-controlled devices. North Korea produces and distributes its own computers and smartphones. Samjian tablets come preloaded with dictionaries, games, and propaganda apps, but no access to the global Internet. Arirang phones, locally branded smartphones with limited calling and Internet access. Monitoring software, devices often contain hidden surveillance tools that log usage. Ownership of devices gives the appearance of modernity, but usage is strictly circumscribed. Surveillance and control. Technology in North Korea functions foremost as a tool of control. Call monitoring, phone calls are monitored, with suspicious conversations flagged. Computer use, logs of activity may be reviewed by authorities. Information restrictions, foreign media and radios are illegal unless specifically approved. Punishments, possession of unauthorized media, South Korean dramas, Western music, can bring imprisonment or worse. Technology is not private, it is watched. The black market of information. Despite restrictions, North Koreans have built underground networks to access outside information. USB drives, smuggled across the Chinese border, loaded with South Korean dramas, Hollywood films, or even K-pop. Radios, tuned secretly at night to foreign stations, though illegal. DVDs and SD cards, spread hand-to-hand in markets, fueling quiet cultural revolutions. Risk and reward, watching a banned drama is both dangerous and thrilling, an escape into another world. For many, foreign media is the first taste of life beyond the regime's narrative. Cyber power from a closed land. Paradoxically, while citizens are cut off from the global web, the regime invests heavily in cyber operations. Elite training, a small cadre of hand-picked students trained in math and computer science, often abroad. Cyber attacks, North Korean hackers linked to bank heists, cryptocurrency theft, and attacks on foreign companies. Lazarus Group, infamous for the 2014 Sony hack and multi-million-dollar cyber thefts. State strategy, cyber warfare provides income and leverage against enemies without conventional conflict. Thus, while ordinary citizens live offline, Pyongyang's digital warriors roam the globe. Technology in daily life. For the average North Korean, technology is both desired and feared. Radios and TVs, tuned permanently to state channels, with tampering illegal. Mobile phones, widespread but monitored, calls limited within the country. Household devices, rare. Electricity shortages make appliances unreliable. Everyday life is technological only in appearance, modern devices without modern freedom. The paradox of exposure. Exposure to foreign technology is dangerous but transformative. South Korean dramas show prosperity and freedom, sparking doubts about propaganda. Music and fashion inspire subtle changes in youth culture, sometimes punished, sometimes tolerated. Information flow creates cracks in the regime's ideological walls. Technology thus becomes a silent revolution, reshaping thoughts one USB stick at a time. Closing reflection. North Korea's technological landscape is one of contradictions: an isolated internet mimicking the internet, smartphones without freedom, hackers who roam global networks while their own people remain offline. It is a world where technology serves the state, yet secretly empowers individuals who dare to glimpse beyond borders. As you rest, imagine the glow of a single tablet screen in a darkened North Korean home, playing a smuggled drama from Seoul. Outside, the state insists on loyalty. Inside, a family sees another world, and for a moment, the cage feels just a little less closed. Part 20: The Future of North Korea, Shadows and Possibilities. Introduction: A nation at a crossroads. North Korea today stands as one of the most secretive and isolated countries in the world. It is a land forged by history, colonial trauma, war, dictatorship, famine, and resilience. Yet as the 21st century moves forward, questions linger about the future of the Hermit Kingdom. Will it remain a fortress of Juche and military first rule, or will internal pressures and global changes slowly reshape its destiny? This chapter reflects on the challenges, possibilities, and uncertainties that define North Korea's path forward. The dynasty's grip, stability or fragility. At the core of North Korea's future lies the Kim dynasty. Kim Il-sung, the eternal president, founded the system, embedding Juche and authoritarian control. Kim Jong-il, the dear leader, survived famine and collapse by leaning on Songun and propaganda. Kim Jong-un, current leader, consolidating power through nuclear advances and selective modernization. The dynasty provides continuity but also creates vulnerability. The system rests on one family's legitimacy. The economy, between survival and collapse. North Korea's economy remains precarious. Sanctions, severe international restrictions choke trade and finance. China's role, as the main trading partner, Beijing props up Pyongyang, but uneasily. Markets, Jiangmadang informal black markets have become essential for survival, fostering quiet economic change. Modernization attempts, special economic zones and limited foreign investment remain fragile experiments. The economy can endure hardship, but growth without reform remains elusive. Food security, eternal struggle. Agriculture continues to be a defining weakness. Terrain limits, mountains and poor soil hinder production. Climate vulnerability, floods and droughts often devastate harvests. Dependence on aid, international food assistance has repeatedly staved off catastrophe. Private plots, families rely on secret farming to survive, a quiet defiance of state structures. Without dramatic reform, food insecurity will remain the country's Achilles heel. Nuclear weapons, the sword and shield. North Korea's nuclear program is both survival strategy and global bargaining chip. Deterrence, ensures the regime's survival against foreign intervention. Diplomacy tool, used to extract concessions and aid through cycles of crisis and negotiation. Risk, provokes sanctions and deepens isolation. The future of North Korea's global relations will likely hinge on how it wields its nuclear arsenal. Society and information, cracks in the wall. While the state maintains strict control, small cracks have appeared. Foreign media, USB drives and smuggled DVDs bring glimpses of outside life. Markets, foster informal networks outside government control. Generational shift, younger North Koreans, exposed to smuggled media and trade, see the world differently than their elders. These shifts may not topple the regime, but they change the social fabric quietly over time. Relations with the world. North Korea's future depends in part on its external relationships. With the U.S., tense cycles of hostility and negotiation, unresolved since the Korean War. With South Korea, occasional cooperation, but always shadowed by mistrust. With China, lifeline and leash, Beijing sustains Pyongyang, but limits its independence. With the wider world, increasingly defined by isolation and sanctions. Diplomacy offers opportunities, but mistrust defines every interaction. Scenarios for the future. Several possible futures lie ahead. continuation of the status quo. The regime endures, surviving through repression, limited reforms, and nuclear deterrence. Gradual reform, economic and social cracks widen, leading to a controlled opening, similar to China's reforms in the late 20th century. Crisis and collapse, internal instability, leadership struggles, or external shock cause the regime to unravel. Reunification, though distant, the possibility of reunification with South Korea remains a dream for some, though fraught with massive challenges. The future may blend elements of all these scenarios, unfolding slowly and unpredictably. Closing reflection. North Korea's story is one of endurance against all odds, a small, impoverished country that has nevertheless survived war, famine, and isolation while capturing global attention. Its future remains uncertain, shaped by the choices of its leaders, the resilience of its people, and the pressures of a changing world. As you drift to rest, imagine North Korea's horizon. The rivers of the north, the mountains of Pyeongtaek, the bustling yet curated boulevards of Pyongyang, and the hidden villages where families plant secret crops. The hermit kingdom persists, shrouded in mystery, its future unwritten, waiting to unfold in the decades ahead. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Background Historian tonight. Please leave comments describing what you want to see in a future episode. Please have a fantastic night's sleep, and I will see you tomorrow. Background Historian out.